Okay, this is a new project, a Bamford EG1 stationary engine. For quite a few years I've always been interested in these old engines. You see them at rallies and things like that, and I was thinking I'd like to sort of have a go at restoring one, or at least getting one going, and they usually come up for silly money, and you very rarely see them locally, as the local pickups are usually used on farms back in the 40s and 50s. And I found a seller last week before, middle of June I found it, selling this engine as a ongoing concern sort of thing really. He said it had run in the last couple of years, though I don't believe that. So I sort of negotiated with him to sort of go and have a look at it and sort of maybe pick it up. So we did this on Friday. We went to pick this engine up and drove down to Stenning, which is in West Sussex, to pick this engine up with a friend of mine in a Land Rover. So we popped down there and had a look at it, and as you can see, it's all there. It's all more or less complete. It's a bit rusty on the outside, but it's not a total sort of basket case or anything like that. And the trouble with basket cases like that, you often find that when you sort of get all the bits, start putting the bits back together, half is missing. It was a very reasonable price. The engine turned over, so I thought, well, yeah, let's have a go at getting it going. So the thing with this engine is it weighs 160 kilos, and even the effort of getting it onto the back of the Land Rover involved 3 people lugging this engine. Now, obviously 2 people can get hold of the end of the crank and lift it up, not too much of a problem, but it's bloody heavy, and it's, as you get older you realise that you can't put yourself under, you don't want to put your back out because it takes sort of weeks for it to go back again. So anyway, we got it on the Land Rover and got it home and managed to get it unloaded. And you see that exhaust gasket I've just taken off there, just starting the strip down. Got it back home, and this is basically where we are now. So this is a 1940s engine from circa 1945, single-cylinder 4-stroke petrol, 1.5 horsepower at 750 RPM. So it's a real low-speed engine, which is what I like. I like these old low-speed slogging engines. You could just sit in there chuffing away. Now, when I turned it over, even though the engine was free to turn, they didn't seem to have any compression at all. Now, that's what you'd expect with an engine that's been sitting around for a while. It's more than likely going to be like a stuck valve, or you never know until you open them up, but usually it's something like a stuck exhaust valve. It's sitting around. So at the moment I'm taking the carburettor off. Once we get the carburettor off, we can start to take the whole engine apart and have a look inside to see why it's got no compression. So this is really what this point is. The point of this is to take the thing apart and find out why we're not building any compression. I think if it had built compression, I would have serviced the magneto and the carburettor and just gave it a run just to see how well it runs and how much it smokes, etc. But obviously that's not going to happen. So this is a Solex carburettor they put on these. I think their parts are fairly easy to get hold of still. I haven't looked, I must admit, but there must be quite a lot of these engines around, and certainly these carburetors wouldn't have just been used on this engine, they would have been used on lots of engines of this era, I should think. But you can see that the thing's all there. The tank's in nice condition. It's actually funny enough, the tank's one of the things that's actually still got its original paint on it. But there's a little bit of movement in the main bearings, but very little. So its general wear looks reasonable. So there's just getting the carburetor. It's got an internal mechanical governor, and there's the carburetor there. Normal butterfly carburetor, and you see this hole here I'm pointing at now is where the tickler should go. That's fallen out. And basically all the tickler does, for those who don't know, I know most of my followers will know what a tickler does. In the old days, before the emissions control and all that sort of started to take force. To start these old engines, you had the choke like you would in any car or any other sort of or bike or any engine really. Any petrol engine still had a choke, or the Americans like to call it a strangler. But you also had a tickler, and what that did was, when you pushed the tickler, it pushed a pin down on the top of the float in the carburetor, and that allowed more fuel to flood into the carburetor. Basically, you flood the carburetor with fuel, the fuel would run into the inlet tract, then you turn it over and you'd have a big rich mixture to start. So you'd have a big cloud of black smoke as it fired, and once it was running, the fuel would be used back up, and then the float level would be taken over. It would be taken over to its normal regulated fuel level, done by the float. So basically, all the tickler does is make the engine flood. So this is the point where I'm removing the top of the. This is like the rocker box. Now you can see on the left-hand side there's an orifice there. That's where we fill the water up. It's a thermosiphon effect. So basically, the water circulates round. It's heated at the bottom and it's cooler at the top. That's the idea, I assume, and it just circulates around and keeps the engine cool. You can see that I've got 5 nuts there and 1 bolt, so obviously a stud's been pulled out at one point. I'll just pop this off, remove this, and on the right hand side that's where you fill the oil. That cap at the right is where you fill the oil. This has got a cork gasket on the top here. That shouldn't be much of a problem. We can soon make up a gasket. You can buy gasket sheet and stuff like that pretty easily, so that's not much of a problem. So at the moment I'm just investigating what's inside and see if I can see why anything obvious. And I've found that one of the valves, or the exhaust valve, is actually stuck open. And also at this point I've noticed that there seems to be a push rod missing, which is a bit alarming. You're thinking, how am I going to get a push rod? Now I could probably make a push rod at work, but at the moment you see this is the rocker arm with no push rod missing, and this one's got a push rod in it, and that one's missing. You see on the left hand side of that rocker arm pushing now, there's a stud missing on the left hand side as well, so that will also need to be replaced with something. Now it could have fallen out at the bottom of the engine. I'm not entirely sure how it sits in. I need to have a look at those rocker arms a bit closer to see what's going on. Okay, so at this point now, I'll take a couple of minutes, 5 minutes or so to work out. What I've got to do is I've got to get this rocker arm off. I wouldn't normally bother, but the rocker arm has to come out because I can't get access to the cylinder head bolts. And I need to obviously get the cylinder head off to have a look at the valve to see if it hit the piston or what, just to make sure that the valve's straight. And obviously I've got to get the valve out to get it moving again, and I need to grind valves in and things like that. So the head's got to come off it. Now this is a screw I've just removed from the end of the rocker arm. Okay, I'm just trying to work out now how I get that pin out. It takes me a bit of time, so I'll just go through a few things about this engine whilst I'm sitting here trying to work out how to get this arm out. This top end of this rocker arm isn't lubricated from engine oil. It's a grease cap on the other end that's out of view. The other end of the rocker arm that's out of view, there's a grease cap there, and then basically all you do is you pump in a bit of grease every now and then, and that leaches out through the rocker arms and lubricates the rockers themselves. So quite honestly, grease is absolutely fine. It's running at such a low speed. I mean, these rocker arms are only going at sort of like 400 oscillations per minute, so they're running at a fairly slow speed. There's not going to much is going to wear out on them, as long as you keep them obviously greased up, and it's sort of part of the regular maintenance and running schedule you do on one of these engines. You'd grease it. I think the oil changes, they suggest an oil change every 160 hours. I mean, that's I bet that's never been done. I mean, that's if that's an engine running all week, you'll be changing it by day 6. You'll be changing the oil. So yeah, what I'm doing now is I'm trying to get this, as I say, trying to get this rocker arm out. A bit confused of how to do this, but I'll get there in a minute. So it looks at the moment all I need is probably a rocker arm, or this is what I think at the moment actually. What the push, not a rocker arm, sorry, a push rod. The push rod is actually is in the engine. What it's done is it's dropped off the bottom of the cam follower. The cam's underneath, down by the crank, and there's a couple of levers, and the push rod sits on one of those levers, and obviously it's fallen out because the valve's stuck. There's no tension on the spring to hold the push rod in place, so the push rod's just fallen off the top of the rocker arm, and that's just fallen down inside the engine. So that's good, that part's there. That pin on the end of the rocker arm, not sure where that is. I'm hoping that when I open the sump up, it will be sitting in the sludge at the bottom of the engine, hopefully. That's if it's got any oil in it, of course. But you can see that all the arms and the rocker arms are nicely lubricated. It's clearly hasn't been sitting out in the rain, which is reassuring. You never know what you're getting with engines like this. You never know how truthful the person was. I think he's bought these engines, and a lot of them he hasn't touched. And this one, to me, I reckon he's bought this engine 25, 30 years ago, never touched it. He was in his 70s now, and he's just realising time's running out. He's never going to get it serviced, and he, I suppose, begrudgingly sells it. Has to get rid of it. Okay, I'm just trying to fish out a socket I've just dropped inside the engine. It's not that hard to get out. It's very easy to access all these parts in these engines because they're so simple. And funnily enough, actually, the exhaust valve and the inlet valve look like exactly the same. Not like in a modern engine where the inlet valve's usually larger and the exhaust valve's quite often sodium filled. Certainly in a lot of the engines with sodium filled to aid cooling. The valves are basically exactly the same. So yeah, I'm just still trying to work out how to get this arm out, but I've just about got there now. I think I've sussed out what I've got to do. So just bear with me whilst I get the rocker arm out. Notice just how to frame the spark plug at the bottom. It's an old Lodge spark plug. I haven't seen one of those for a while. They're the large thread ones. I think they're 18mm thread, aren't they? I think. But there we go. There's the rocker arm out at last. You can see it's nicely greased up. And couldn't feel any wear on it at all. So this engine's obviously been sort of fairly well lubricated. That's always reassuring. If things like that are lubricated, it probably means that there's the rocker arms themselves. You see the pin missing on the top left-hand corner, top right now. There's that stud missing. So that, it all looks like it's probably okay. It's been looked after fairly well. Now there's one of the push rods. It's nice, isn't it? It's a nice shiny push rod. Looks perfectly straight. Now that's the one I could get access to. I haven't found the other one yet. I'll find that later on. But that's the cups on each end of the push rod. Now, yeah, I don't know if you can see the valve in the distance. My hand's in the way now. There, the valve in the distance is the valve that's stuck open. The exhaust valve is stuck open. That's obviously what we need to look at to investigate what's happened there. So at the moment we're just trying to work out how we're going to get the head off it. It's only a 3/8 socket, and even though it probably would have done it, it's done the inside bolts. The inside bolts are obviously soaked in oil all the time. It was pretty tight, but they did undo, and they weren't all rusty and horrible. But these ones here, these are the ones that sit in the water jacket. They're sort of like encapsulated nuts. So what I have to do is I'll have to go find a 1/2-inch drive socket set. I need to take some of my better tools down with me, because I haven't actually got any decent tools with me. I've got a few sort of like fairly cheap socket sets in the garage, but they're not particularly good quality, so I need to go and find a better socket set to work on this engine. And I've also got some Whitworth spanners going, because I'm actually using metric sockets at the moment, believe it or not. Most of them are fitted, but I'm going to come across a bolt or a nut in there that I can't get hold of, I can't get grip of, or it's too loose or just a bit too tight. So, because a lot of these bolts are going to be bloody tight in here, I need to have the right tools really to work on this thing. So, just having a bit of a clear out inside, make sure everything's okay. Then I'm going to have to go and get a tool to get the bolts off. Okay, so there you go. Magically, I've removed the bolt. They're the two bolts that are in the water jacket side, and they've come out fairly easily once you've got a bigger socket set on them. Remove those out, and now we're ready to basically lift the head off the engine and have a look inside. And there you go, in all its glory. Okay, so the right hand, sort of like reverse D shape, is the water jacket. Obviously the piston and cylinder in the middle, as you can see, and the left hand, those two holes over the pushrod guide holes. I'm just looking at the piston now just to see what sort of state it's in. It's fairly oily, so that's good, so it means the bore isn't all rusty. So we'll get a closer look there. Nicely carbonised up like all these old engines used to get. It's amazing now, you look at a modern engine and take it apart with similar hours on it, you won't have any of this crud on it. It burns so much cleaner. And this is the carbon ring that's left behind from combustion, obviously, but also it only goes down the bore about 5mm or so, because the piston rings scrape up to that top point, and then that carbon that can actually act as a seal and keep the actually help in oil consumption. As the bore wears, it can help act as an oil control barrier. Years ago, a friend of mine, and we stripped his engine down in his VW Scirocco because he wanted to decoke it because it was pinking a bit. Took it apart and cleaned all that carbon ring out, and it used so much oil after that he had to change it. Now you can see that piston rocking slightly. There's a bit of wear on the top of the stroke of the engine. It's probably feelings like about 10 thou wear on there, so it's quite a wear lip. I'm not too concerned about it at the moment. You might be able to get an oversized piston for this. I need to have a look, but obviously the engine will need boring, and I don't really want to do that unless it's absolutely necessary. So what I'm going to do is try and get the engine running with the bore it's got on it, and we'll see how we get on with that. Okay, so here's the exhaust valve, and you can see that it's stuck open. You'll see a bit later on, it's a bit clearer. Just trying to work out how this valve to move down. At the moment it's absolutely solid. I'm just trying to lever it to see if I can get it to move. But at the moment it's not moving. It's well and truly seized up. So initially it looks to me like it isn't bent, which is quite nice. So it probably means I've ordered some, but I've actually managed to get it just carbonised up. It's out of frame at the moment. I'll get you back into frame in 1 minute.
Still going to need some at some point.
Yeah, we need to get that valve out because I need to grind it in as well. But we certainly need to sort out the problem with the sticking valve. We can't have the valve sticking when it's running, because not only will it just stop the engine, there's a good chance that if it did that again, the pushrod would jump out and could jam up on the camshaft or something and do some engine damage. So we don't really want to just sort of free the valve up with a bit of WD-40 or whatever and just put it back together. We need to get the valve out and have a look to see why it jammed up in the first place. So at this point here, I'm going to try and work out how to get the valve out. Now, what I'm doing, I don't know if anyone's taken valves apart before. I mean, on cars and things, what you usually have is a split collet. And what you do is you apply valve spring compressor to the top of the valve cap, which is the bit I'm pushing down with the outside of the socket now. There, that's the valve cap. And then you just lift the two collets out with a pair of pliers or a magnet. Magnet used to work pretty well. And then it releases the top spring, and then the valve just falls out. It's not as simple as that with this engine, because first of all the valve's solid anyway. But what if you can see, there's a little pin that goes through the valve stem, and that's held in position by the cap there. And you can see it's got a dished, so you can't pull the pin out unless you push the valve spring down. I can't push the valve spring down because the valve's stuck. So this, first of all I've got to get the valve back into its, so the valve's in its seat, and then I've got a bit more room to get the valve spring compressed and get the pin out. So at the moment that's what I'm working out what to do. But everything else looks okay inside the engine so far. There's no cracks or anything I can see. Obviously I'll have to replace the gasket, but This is an old pair of pliers I found in the garage, but they're absolutely knackered. I don't know if you can see into those pliers just there. They were not even in the line, so they're junk. They need throwing away, straightening out. I think someone else has used them in the workshop and bent them. It wasn't me. I have a bit more respect for tools than some people do. So, okay, you can see the valve clearly there is stuck open. So we need to address that problem first off. So what I end up doing in the end, we're just about to jump to the next scene, and I'll end this edit for the audio, and I'll explain what's happening in the next video. So yeah, all we're doing now is trying to get this pin out with various pairs of pliers and things like that. And once the pin's out, we can actually try and get the valve moving. Yeah. Okay, welcome to the shed. This is a new venue for you, isn't it? So I've got the head off the engine. That was fairly straightforward. The bolts weren't as seized as I thought they were going to be. Obviously got the head off because initially when I took the rocker cover off, you saw my other part of the video, you could see that the valve was stuck, and it looked like one of the push rods was missing, which was a bit of a disappointment. I was thinking, the seller did say, as I say, he thought it was running. I don't think he ever had this engine running, not for a long time. Yeah, I took the head off to investigate and see what was actually wrong inside, and I was expecting to find a bent valve maybe. And I'd assumed what had happened was the engine had failed. Someone had taken the rocker cover off, looked inside, probably taken the bent push rod out, and then sort of thought, oh well, it needs a new valve. I think I'll either scrap it or do it at a later stage. You know what these jobs are like, and never ever got round to doing it. Anyway, long story short was I took the head off last night off video, managed to get the bolts out okay, lifted the head off, and the valve doesn't actually look bent at all. So I spent the next half an hour trying to get the valve spring off. It doesn't use collets like a conventional engine does. It uses a valve, like a pin. Let me just show you. All it is this pin like this, I think on camera, that goes to the top of the collet and just holds the collet in position. So I eventually managed to get that out. It was a bit tricky because there's not a lot of room to move in there. Luckily the valve springs are pretty weak because this engine only runs at 750 RPM. Got that off this morning. So the valve's loose, well not loose, it's free to move now, but the problem is it won't slide out. Now you can see if I twist it, there's no run out in it at all, which is good because it means it hasn't hit the piston. So I think, excuse me sniffing all the time, I've got hay fever, so I think what's happening is basically the valve stem's carbonised up. So at the present time I'm trying to get this valve out. Now I've been sticking my finger down the exhaust port, I can feel the back of the stem. I just want to try and sort of get off any carbon that's building up, but it doesn't feel that bad, but it just won't slide past the valve guides, which is good because it means the valve guides are in good condition. I did look at the bore, and there is quite a wear ridge on the bore, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try it how it is. I don't think we're going to have to put a rebore on it. I don't want to put a rebore on it. I don't even know if I can get an oversized piston for it. So I think the next stage will be to get this valve out, get the valves grounded, and oh yes, the other thing was I forgot to mention, when I took the head off and looked down with the torch, the push rod that I thought had been taken out was actually sitting at the bottom of the push rod tunnel, right at the bottom, resting against the sump. So I've got the push rods, so I've got both the push rods now, so that's brilliant. There is that one issue I think you saw on the top of one of the rocker arms. There's like a little pin, sort of like a little mushroom shaped thing on the top, the end of the push rod that holds the push rod in position. it looks like it's either fallen out or it's been taken out. Now I might find that in the sump when I take the sump off it in all the sludge and stuff. So there's a good chance I'll find that in the bottom of the engine, and hopefully that'll be okay. So working to get this valve out now. I'm just going to keep on working away at it, and just hopefully sooner or later it will come out. Now you can see it's getting nearer and nearer coming out each time I do it actually. So that looks like it's out. Oh, there you go. Soaked it in a bit of lubricant. It's still tight. Let's put a bit of oil on there, slide it back again. There's all valves on these engines. Used to have screwdriver slots, which was very convenient. Yeah, it's free. It's nice and free now. That's all it was. It was just carbonised up. I'm going to get this valve out anyway because I want to grind it in. Yeah. Come on, you're almost there. So I'm just going to maybe a bit of a burr on the top of the valve where I was pulling on those pins. So into the top of the valve stem there. So I'll get a bit of emery if I can find a bit of emery. Let's have a look at it, see what it looks like. It doesn't feel burr, there's a little burr on there actually. So anyway, let's get this. Let's pause the video and then try and get this valve out. Okay, valve out. And you can see it's in good condition. It definitely needs grinding in. That should be a grey area all the way around there. We'll grind that in later on. The valve's in good condition, not bent. The burr was just where the top of the rocker arm hammers on it, so clean that up. That's not a problem. Excellent. So it doesn't need any parts so far. So I'll get that cleaned up. It's amazing how just something like that, carbonised valve, can stop the engine from running altogether. It's obviously been sitting around for a while. Someone's obviously turned it over, pushed the valve in, hasn't returned, no compression. So good. Let's get the valves ground in.